The scenes that make Halloween. We've done a lot of scene analyses over the years, something like 40 since we started, and sometimes a theme crops up between the bunch. So today, we're combining every spooky scene fit for the Halloween season. Here are 7 different scene breakdowns back to back to back. I'll also give my thoughts about each scene and video on the in-betweens, because it's just nice to look back on. Trimming out any sponsors and pauses, let's begin with Hotel Transylvania 1. Being grand for being serious, ironically enough. It's Hotel Transylvania again. Not one of the later ones this time, because this series is seriously hit or miss, or maybe a slow but consistent downward spiral would be more accurate to say. Whilst later productions of the world of Hotel Transylvania bogs itself down with more ensemble cast, minimal plots, and a more deranged focus on whatever the hell you call this, the original Hotel Transylvania is what sparked all of this, so it must have been a pretty impressive spark. As I understand it, it's still just a 50-50 split, getting mixed responses between critics and audiences, but I think, especially when compared to what it later became, that there's something special about it. So let's reveal behind the capey curtain the scene that changed Hotel Transylvania 1. Now, there's a few options at hand here. The part where Johnny first arrives, Johnny and Mavis watching the sunrise for the first time, or the spark of the bad times when everything gets revealed at the dance party. But no, whilst these all have their moments, the part where Hotel Transylvania 1 really pulls in some cinematic techniques and adjusts the tone of the movie for a time is when Dracula brings Johnny into the back rooms. No, not those kind. Up to this point, Mavis has been living in her father's same hotel for 118 years, unable to leave and even deceived not to go by her father. Everyone from the Monster Kingdom is coming to visit this Halloween, and now a human has showed up too. And after being pretty unable to get rid of this guy, he's become intertwined with everybody, recognized as a Frankenstein relative after a bit of makeup. Everyone likes his company, and most importantly, Mavis has zinged and is head over heels. It's the first time Dracula has ever seen something like this, and so has decided now to make a serious decision in regards to Johnny and reveal something to him.
There's something I need to show you.
And so the two enter this dark room that's either a genuine gravesite or just Dracula's bedroom. I'm not sure which way they're implying it.
Hey, are we at a funeral right now? Oh, wait, no. It's your bed.
And now, in a surprisingly artsy shot, Dracula stands off in the distance, moonbeams shining down on him, holding a candlestick and looking up at the portrait. In a single composition alone, we've drastically changed the mood as the air is different in here, other than just the dust. And so, after Johnny's brief tangent, he comes to spot what's next.
Wow! I know her!
And this, I think, at least is one element that was really, really good in the first movie and then forever was tattered into shreds for every sequel. Johnny. As we've come to know him nowadays, he's just one dumb idiot, likes modern-day trends and just going with the flow. But in this first movie, there's a whole character trait that wasn't subtracted away yet that allows for so much potential depth in his character. He is a traveler. His aspirations in life is seeing the sides of the world, meeting people at youth hostels. After somehow having so much experience already, he can sit at a table and talk about tales and stories he has in every single location there is.
How did you deal with the mob?
Yeah, it does get pretty crazy in the summer.
Johnny's not dumb in the original, far from it. He's incredibly wise and knowledgeable, all about history and culture, anthropology. It's written to just complete Mavis and her restricted in a tower ways, but it also opens up to making him such an interesting character to see what experiences he has to tell and what lessons he has to share. But anyway.
I've seen that picture at the ruins of Lubov.
Spelt like this, by the way. Johnny knows how to pronunciate from other cultures, and it's a way to see a side of the story that even Dracula doesn't know. Look at how he scowls with a side eye that Johnny thinks he has something to say here, when Drac is clearly the one with a story to tell.
There's a whole legend around that lady.
A legend?
And yet, it piques Dracula's intrigue. For once, this is something even he is not familiar with. Perhaps he can learn an extract of the human world out of this. And so, Johnny gently takes the candles, steps forwards, and lifts it up at her, lighting up the view as he takes control over Drac's more darkened approach.
The story is that a lonely count met her by chance, and they say that no two souls were ever more meant for each other.
Coming out of 3D CGI entirely, we're now given a storybook type aesthetic, with shades of pink and purple, silhouettes of 2D characters each layered on top of each other so the camera can still pull into a sort of 3D environment, parallax scrolling taking place on the edge elements as some pieces move faster than the other on the frame.
Eventually, they settled down at Castle Lubov and had a child.
Same camera motion with lengthy cross dissolves between scenes to make things feel more gentle and smooth as we learn of the happy times of a romantic experience. And whether true or not, the castle looks idyllic and bright, only emphasizing the positive attributes of this human story. Though there are dark clouds, so maybe it is just white tinted glasses.
A fire started mysteriously one night, and it killed both of them.
And now we get the reverse, camera pulling away from the events rather than into it as it attempts to escape the tragic turning point. We never see the husband's face, but we can all piece it together. And then the overexposing light obscures the image of them all, symbolically lighting them aflame until they are no more. And you can see the image distort like heat in the air, only to come back to our scene staring directly into the fire with the candle Johnny has commandeered.
When I was at the castle, I could still feel their powerful love.
Remember when Johnny used to talk like this, so somber and respectful, investing in this tale of love and being spiritual with emotions of a significant location? This is a side of Johnny I wish survived the later films because this is some of Hotel Transylvania's best. And as he comes to the end of his understanding, the candlelights slowly dip out of frame, Johnny's brightly lit positive spin is transitioning out to darkness again, as Dracula responds with...
The legend is wrong.
God, and look at the composition. A classic vampire shot, silhouetted outright with just a moonbeam to highlight, as Johnny's candle is not even directly in frame anymore.
It was only the wife that died.
It's Drac wallowing over his most depressing memory, but I love how you can see his shadow also beaming off of his collar there. Never before have we seen a shot so drained of color. I mean, look at the rest of the options from this movie. And so, he reaches up out of the frame, we get a split-second view of his hand, still wearing the engagement ring after all these years. Is this something you spotted at any other earlier point in the movie? We get this shot ever so briefly, just as brilliantly gloomy. Is that his eyes glowing to the smallest degree in there? The dust really pulling it all together just to add more to that moonbeam before we see... I mean, no one was really surprised, so it's not really much of a plot point, but there it is. Turns out Mavis's mother was also the type to fall for a complete goofball, if this face is to be believed. And as Johnny comes to the realization, looking empathetic for Dracula's struggles, Drac retorts with,
She was killed by your kind.
You can see him growing into the anger of it beforehand. And of course, that glow. Man, maybe I'm just a stickler for lighting. I wish Hotel Transylvania played a lot more with lighting. And then we fade into his version of events. Not a 2D storybook this time, but fully realized in 3D as Drac actually lived it. But to have a little bit of history, everything's in sepia. Though that way it still feels kinda storybooky, like an old fairy tale. And now we see the castle a bit more glum, aiming up at the 2D silhouette of the vampires in the window, now for some other parallels, amongst a mob of fire-wielding humans.
Honey?
Though the room may not be too decorated, the frame certainly is. This is another frame within a frame as we catch burning beams. The castle is coming down soon, and the vampires are compositionally entrapped.
Go hide. I'll take care of this.
And also notice, the couple are reversed from the storybook. More emblematic that the humans have the tale all backwards. And with those simple words, we move from a close-to shot of their faces over to their hands, holding on before letting go. Another marker of their love and the sever this action will bring. And the whole moment is even in slow-mo, as if reliving it in a bottle as Drac returns to the memory again after seemingly thousands of times. Or just because it all moved on so fast. We can see Drac try to talk to the mob and come to a diplomatic solution, only for it to all come to a head off screen. Drac turns to the side and we fade to just her hand. It's very simple stranded from a plot perspective. They don't really ham much into the motions or the scenes. It's more symbolic than anything else. Does that make it more artsy or does that make it lazy? Perhaps this scene was more emblematic of the future of this franchise anyway, as even here the plot is minimalized and only implied for the sake of its young audience, I guess? Or just the fact that it didn't want to go there. And in expanding the sequel to just be Hotel Transylvania but more, perhaps this is one of the very elements that got stretched to the furthest degree. A plot that is simple, predictable, and not deepened any further. Who knows? But this next shot is stunning. A castle on fire, sparking the whole sky in red as our vampire stands watching, silhouetted in brightness now as his cape makes him the darkness. No words but the sounds of the baby crying. Apart from the commentary,
They are the real monsters.
and we fade back to that full portrait, and Johnny just dumbfounded by the devastation of it all. But it all comes full circle as we learn about what bridges the gap between this Drac and our current one.
I built this place for my love, to protect her child.
And that has been his background driving force this entire time, keeping Mavis safe. But against all he has seen up to this point with her own goals and aspirations and the influence Johnny is having himself upon everything around him, Drac has an intention in bringing him here, and it's to address this heartbreaking point.
As a father, you do everything to keep your family safe, even if you have to break their trust.
And against the world that Dracula knows, he can see that this relationship would not work, even if he's to the point of approving of the boy more.
Can you tell me for certain that if we came out in the open, everyone would accept us?
But that is just not the case. And Johnny, with his extended wisdom of all the types of people he's met across the world, knows that there is still hatred in this world.
I'll go for good this time.
And talking about it like adults in a respectful manner is finally the word that will turn Johnny away. Even if, ironically, it's not what Dracula is directly after anymore.
No. I don't want to ruin her birthday party.
And so they come to the mutual agreement of enjoying this one night and sneaking out the day after, for the sake of everybody.
The last thing I wanted was to hurt her. Or you.
And from there, they choose to back away from the moment, lightening up on jokes over being a vampire or impersonating the other monsters.
Oh, I have too many kids.
It breaks the vibe, but it's all about the two growing as a pair to like each other in a way that's genuinely endearing, if you choose to look at it that way. It's a brief piece of the total Hotel Transylvania runtime, but I think this scene is one of the highlights of the movie. The moment it chooses to change up the mood of the movie into one that's a bit more serious and mature for a moment, showcasing some filmic prowess beyond, look at what these bodies can do. And from there we have a big fun party, the dramas of everything tattering down, and the final revelation of dragging Johnny back and just trusting it all. If only this was an actual good choice and Johnny didn't immediately drop his IQ on his wedding day or something. You know what, let's make this a ranking video. I think despite Hotel Transylvania being very unscary and just quirky Halloween movies, this scene here is so special for being a real diamond in the rough. A hint of darker backstory that really stands out, especially after seeing how fluid future installments look. It doesn't redefine cinema, but this is a solidly great moment and the emotive highlight of the entire series. Let's put it solidly in A. But let's go actually spooky now with Laika's Coraline. Okay, when you think of classic animated horror movies, Coraline is one of those iconic projects that scarred the lives of many children. Even if you haven't seen Coraline, you know all about it, and everyone knows the whole button eyes element. Ugh. Well, considering the fact that I was too scared to watch Chicken Run as a kid, it's probably quite a relief for me personally to have never seen this movie before now. And most stop-motion projects, to be honest. I've still not seen Nightmare Before Christmas, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Corpse Bride, The Pirates, anything. But since the spooky season is upon us, it seems a no-brainer to tackle this movie and dissect the scene that changed Coraline. And to me, the turning moment with some interesting techniques to talk about is the point when the other mother finally starts to reveal herself in her stretched out form. For those who don't know how we reach this point, though this synopsis is mostly for me, Coraline lives an unhappy life in her new home. The world is grey and dreary, and she's seemingly neglected by her parents too. But then she discovers this alternate dimension where everything is opposite. Now the world is colourful, her parents granting her everything she wants and generally perking up her life. until they've turned around to demand she sews buttons into her eyes in order to stick around. And now when she goes to sleep, she's not taken back, and the world around her is beginning to show its deceptions. And right now, she's looping back to the house from outside after a reassuring chat with a cat.
Good, kitty.
We've just come to learn this whole world is entirely constructed out of the house grounds and nothing else. But at least Coraline has an ally. And so she turns back to the front entrance of the house, directing our eye to the entrance through the single light source as it's the other mother guiding Coraline there. And as she steps up, we see she's wearing starry pajamas. This isn't a null point, it's entirely intentional, as this outfit was one that the other mother specifically gifted to Coraline to wear, but symbolically it links to a myth we hear near the start of the film about a bottomless well.
It's supposed to be so deep. If you fell to the bottom and looked up, you see a sky full of stars in the middle of the day.
Coraline is so deep into this web of deception that she, at this point, is seeing stars. Cool. And so she grabs a makeshift weapon in a walking stick and uses it to crowbar her way through the door. The very fact that it's locked like this suggests she's not meant to be here, like the other mother has child-locked the house. And the wider camera angle on this feels like you're a spectator rather than part of the action. After all, according to the other father earlier,
boring our eyes will be on Coraline.
What follows next is your classic composition of an ominous new room. No light inside, the only source coming from the crack in the door, and our protagonist silhouetted against it. It's all so unnerving. As is this entire world, as we've come to learn. It closes in on Coraline in this dim environment, keeping the audience further out of the loop, as even if there is something visible for Coraline to react to, we certainly don't get to. Building up that suspense ever more. Ugh, and then we do see something. Kinda hard to perceive with this low lighting and obscuring shadow, but as you do recognize it, you see it as a bug. One of those classic make your skin crawl subjects when it comes to horror tropes. And as Coraline reacts as we do to this sudden change in aesthetic, the house didn't have moving bug furniture before, we come to see it light up. And amongst the shadows are more glowing bugs. The camera pulls out so we catch more of the room to see a whole bug-inspired room, seemingly out of left field until you realize there's been bug imagery everywhere. Insects invading the dodgy shower, the decoration in her room holding her picture frame, the dress of other mother this whole time with its little backside extensions, and even the wallpaper in the little door room in reality has bugs imprinted into them. It's hard to spot, but it's ever present. Ugh. Though if I was to bring up a small gripe with this scene, I think this shot has a small cinematic mistake in it, and that's the fact that it doesn't direct your eye well enough into the next shot. I'm too encapsulated by the backlighting on the walls or the bug furniture that I don't even notice that other mother is rotating in this shot. So when it suddenly cuts to her on the couch, it seems a bit unexpected, when I think the intention is meant to be you're directed to see her, and then you cut to her. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like they needed an additional camera movement or boosted lights on the couch, or have her bigger on the frame than just tiny in the corner. Maybe? Anyway, other mother is here and ready to greet Coraline. Of course, in a much less subtle way for her intentions this time around. Spinning around on the couch, which is unnerving for how unnatural it all seems. She's really in control of this whole reality.
They say even the proudest spirit can be broken with love.
And now here she is talking about breaking spirits. Ugh. Preying on unhappy children by luring them in with love and paradise, and now Coraline is forced to sit.
Of course, chocolate never hurts. Like one?
What was originally a gift of what every child wants is now revealed to be more bugs. Was this what Coraline was actually eating when she was feasting on her visits before? It certainly seems to be like a delicacy for other mother, and not even eating in a merciful way, dragging them out in two, torturously, considering these bugs were still alive. More insinuations of evil beyond just, this is gross looking. But then...
I want to be with my real mom and dad.
Coraline gets right to the point, ever confrontative and headstrong because she's frustrated and certainly not shy. All the while, other mother just eats across a third of the frame, readying to feast on her final meal.
Is that any way to talk to your mother?
You aren't my mother.
Oof. I don't know if this is brave or naive, but it's the classic stepmom argument lines that really have an impact right now. And with each shot, reverse shot, we get closer to our characters as the drama intensifies.
Apologize at once.
The red couch in the background in the room only building the villainous view of other mother more, whilst Coraline's shots are more blue, another motif of the movie.
List everything that's blue. Just let me work.
Even though yellow and orange is more Coraline's color. But being the gift from other mother suggests Coraline is still very much tangled in her web. She's not got full independence even at this point, if the color theory is to be believed.
I'll give you to the count of 3.
And now it's the classic parental punishment technique, and an excuse to pull the camera away as both take a step back from the camera, leading into...
1, 2...
There it is, the transition. Other mother first seemingly rising as the background drops away as her cheekbones become more defined and angular. It almost seems subtle as the camera works to track her head. It could have been a tilt upwards from down below. But no, stop motion love their one-shot transitions.
3!
And then we get the full spectacle. First showing just a glimpse of this new form with an over-the-shoulder shot and giving us some of that height comparison with Coraline, and then the reverse of this with a low angle up to other mother's skeletal look. It's still the same look underneath, but everything is stretched to be as unnerving and evil looking as possible. Gone is the soft circular look.
Ow! What are you doing? Ow, that hurts!
And now with superior reach and all subtlety out of the window, she can go on the offensive. Plus, Coraline was disobeying anyway, so it's time for punishment. Camera cutting as it hits her face because it's uncomfortable, and the last place we want to be is up close and personal to this thing. And then, with another head-spinning quirk of this dimension, mirrors are traversable. How symbolic for Coraline to be trapped in a place where there's a parallel image being displayed of two worlds.
You may come out when you've learned to be a loving daughter.
And so, Coraline is chucked in solitary confinement. You know, the classic punishment trope. And here you could say is the deepest part of this dimensional pit, as now her starry pajamas are actively glowing. The mythical stars are indeed all you can see in this light. If this wasn't a movie and we'd like to see the environment, please. Only for our next reveal...
Hush and shush, for the beldam might be listening.
Coraline isn't alone here, and we get the first official name of the other mother, the beldam. Anyway, the reveal of these voices is first the uncomfortable wide angle as we see an unrevealed lump in the bedsheets in the corner of the room, and then as we get closer, of course the camera does too, until...
Who are you?
Now, I'm not entirely sure how these ghost children were filmed, but it's an interesting ethereal effect that makes them completely stark from the rest of the cast, seemingly at a lower frame rate that cross-dissolves over itself and composed on top afterwards. Not to mention horrifying, I hate the screaming girl. And with them unchained to gravity, they can move in interesting ways, right up to the camera, swirling around Coraline and up above her, all to expedite the final mysteries of the beldam.
She spied on our life through the little doll's eyes.
Talking in rhymes to that extra spooky, riddly vibe, revealing how the beldam knew of Coraline's predicament, as well as what will happen if she accepts the eye sewing.
She said that she loved us, but she locked us here
and ate up our lives.
In case there were any children considering the ideal for a piece of paradise against neglecting parents, it's also interesting the wording of ate up our lives. It's not eat them. Perhaps it's more of a spiritual thing, sucking the life force out of them in some other way, like a spider sucks their prey and shrivels them. We also see one of the ghost children's spying dolls at the start of the movie being removed of all of its fluff, whilst Coraline's doll is stuffed with sawdust or something. Perhaps that's the life force difference between a subject that's been fully drained and another that hasn't. These other children, by the way, you can spot in all sorts of earlier hints. The dining room has their portraits on the wall, the sad ice cream boy paintings is the ghost boy, and of course, missing children were mentioned multiple times earlier in the film. And so, as the ghosts float about and tell their tale, briefly giving Coraline some button eyes of her own, nice, they tell of how finding their hidden eyes will help free their souls before wrapping themselves back up under the bedsheets. The sequence finishing exactly where it started.
Find our eyes, mistress, and our souls will be freed.
It's also interesting how the souls address Coraline, always as Miss or Mistress. I guess because they too look up to her? Is it an age thing? I wonder. Anyway, on that point, Coraline finally says,
I'll try.
holding onto the bars of the bed, which when composed like this, sure do look like prison bars, adding more to the imprisonment themes, with a Coraline that is now motivated to take down the beldam.
Beating her is my only chance.
And so, to give us progress on that path, to finish off this revelation, we come to see its other Wybie, a friend from before, shown not only to be assisting, but now with an agonized looking forced smile. Horrifying.
I hope that feels better.
And from there, it all continues, with Wybie helping push Coraline back through the small doors so she can finally return to her home dimension. He'll be fine, he's only made of sawdust anyway, like anything else created by the beldam. All the while, the beldam is coming, calling for Coraline. What a green flag of a guy other Wybie is. A green flag. And from there, she escapes. This sequence is the turning point of the movie, of course. From a plot point, it changes the dynamic directly after jumping off of the whole button eyes thing, but it's also here that so many elements and motifs finally come together. The bugs, the stars, the sawdust even. Plus, there's still more, like the spider elements and Coraline being like a trapped prey, like the fly headpiece she wears on her head. God, I could talk about the other elements for hours. This movie genuinely feels like some sort of Kafka production, where there's all these characters that are weird and don't really make sense as this character goes through some sort of turmoil. I really like it. Kids introduced into Kafka. And this sequence begins the visuals that can really scar your childhood memories with that angular transition. And to think, it somehow gets worse in the movie. Having now seen this whole thing, I gotta say, this project is an absolute masterpiece. I'm loving how rich every scene and element is, with all of its symbolism and writing. I guess adapting a novella is a really good prompt to jump off of. Just remember, kids, you're not being neglected, you're just impatient. Right? I mean, I guess an 11-year-old could just be overstimulated for a few days and perceive it all like this, but kinda also feels like gaslighting to me. Appreciate what you've got, and hope it's not genuine neglect. Coraline through and through is just immaculate. I would argue it's the best animated Halloween movie of all time. Properly written out, I love all the hidden details, and though this particular scene isn't exactly my favorite from the movie, I still think it is so quintessentially spooky. Is it better than the Hotel Transylvania one? Yeah! From the character transformation animation to the cool and creepy lore, this is just a fantastic moment. But let's move on to a movie that's not even Halloween themed necessarily, but it works. It is Pixar and Monsters University. We're still in October, so I'm sticking to this faintly horror theme. We've had horror concept art, we've had horror corporatism, and now we've got monsters. Not the most horrifying thing, but whatever. Monsters Inc., Monsters University, and more recently, Monsters at Work. This is a franchise that is near and dear to my heart. I mean, it's a Pixar franchise, of course it is. And since I really enjoyed making that Wreck-It Ralph episode of One Villainous Scene a month ago, damn it, I just feel like making another scene breakdown video essay. And our target lies with the middle child of the Monsters series. The black sheep of the family? Which one's the odd one out, actually? It's like a trifecta of spin-offs, this franchise is. Anyway, Monsters University. I'll admit, it's not a movie I'm particularly ecstatic about, looking at the bigger picture. It's one of the more mediocre of Pixar films, kicking off the sequel era of the company. But even though I wouldn't rate it even vaguely close to the quality and charm of the original Monsters Inc., within this movie is a scene that when I watched for the first time in cinemas, I felt shone brighter than any other scene in the entire franchise. Sure, the Monsters at Work finale was nice, and Monsters Inc. has all sorts of iconic scenes.
Now put that thing back where it came from, or so help me!
But this scene, above all else to me, is my favorite moment from the entire Monsters trilogy, duology plus one. For some context, we've been witnessing Mike and Sully mature in the realms of Monsters University, and most notably, Mike doing everything right to be as scary as possible, despite clearly visually not being, culminating in the finale of a scare competition that they win as Mike's machine was rigged. Distraught and determined to be a real scarer, Mike then commits the most heinous act in their entire reality, entering the human world just outright. Of course, it doesn't seem so bad in the moment, but things go downhill fast. It starts off just how you'd expect. Mike has never been scary, and this next child probably will feel the same. If anything, you feel a little embarrassed for Mike as the child only finds him amusing. But then... oh, schmoopsy poo. This isn't your ordinary bedroom. What happens when a monster fails their mission? Or worse yet, how do you resolve jeopardizing your dimensional secret? We next jump to Sully, who's bursting onto the scene, eventually diving through the door himself amidst the mess. And now the human world looks a little different. The flashing red and blue light single-handedly lighting the scene, the lack of anyone around indoors, the investigative adults just nearby, and now a giant bear-sized Sully sticking out like a sore thumb. This is like the worst case scenario. Talk about high stakes. Especially now the humans have spotted the spotted beast and are giving chase. And he's bright blue! Still, somehow Sully gets away. Crisis averted, at least for a time, but it's here where this moment really shines. Sully, in escaping, ends up finding Mike just sat by a lake. Not some bright and colorful cartoony monster lake, a realistic lake, draped in grey tones and ambient cicadas in the distance. Are they crickets? I don't actually know. It's a scene about reality in reality, or a close enough equivalent. It's here that Monsters University finally confronts its message, and it's a heartbreaking one. It's the idea that maybe you can't always follow your dreams. Maybe for some choices you make, personal failure is an inevitability, and you can only achieve what is realistically possible for yourself, as Mike is just now realizing. He sits dejected, feet almost touching the water, his green almost completely desaturated, as Sully observes, obscured in the shadows, yet still glowing in radiant blue. He will always be more successful. And as he calls out to Mike, there is no response. Just the night ticking on with or without him. Until eventually...
You were right. They weren't scared of me.
The single fact that tarnishes the last decade and a half of Mike's blood, sweat, and tears. For Mike, nothing else in the world matters more than the importance of this one fact. And it's emblematic even further of the theme of this movie, that some people are just built different. No, but really, in this monstrous society of all shapes and sizes, how you're shaped at birth can define how you will succeed. For a Cyclops bull like Mike, he could spend years researching into the night, pass through any theory test with flying colors, and from an objective perspective, do absolutely
everything right.
He could be the most motivated person in the classroom, the most invested in the end goal, and the most avid fan of the art of scaring. He could be the one who
wanted it more than anyone.
And yet, just because of the way he was born, as a small, cute, green little gremlin bull, he could never truly reach his childhood dreams. He could never be the best version of the Mike Wazowski of his dreams.
And I'm just... not.
Because in the reality of this world, there will always be people better than him through the action of just existing. And Sullivan is the total embodiment of that. Built like a beast with a well-honored family name, Sully is the Chad of the classroom, immediately respected by others, peers, and even teachers alike, and with little to no effort. The most successful student of the class. Of all people to be here tonight, James P. Sullivan is by far the worst candidate.
Look, Mike, I know how you feel.
Don't do that. Please don't do that. You do not know how I feel.
Mike, calm down.
And it's true. Throughout the events of this film, Sully has done next to nothing to earn the respect of the people around him. He's been idolized at almost every step for nothing more than being the son of the right monster with the right physique to boot.
Monsters like you have everything. You don't have to be good. You can mess up over and over again, and the whole world loves you.
This is the cruel reality of the monsters' society, and it's the same of our own. Some people have to fight tooth and nail for an ounce of respect, whilst others are granted it upon arrival, and that is a hard pill to swallow. And especially brave of Pixar to plant into their messaging.
You'll never know what it's like to fail, because you were born a Sullivan.
That's the harsh reality this film initially wants to confront. And then we get the response. Sully has heard Mike's grievances and steps out of the shadows, exposing himself to the light as he discusses his inner thoughts too.
I'm the Sullivan who flunked every test, the one who got kicked out of the program, the one who was so afraid to let everyone down that I cheated.
Being put on a pedestal comes with its own tribulations. Having high standards placed onto you means being forced to live up to those expectations. Being respected at the gate means having to sustain that respect as an ongoing chore. And having all eyes on you when you haven't warranted it adds all the more pressure to live up to someone else's imagination of yourself. It's not an enviable position either. As they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Mike, I'll never know how you feel. But you're not the only failure here.
How come you never told me that before?
Because we weren't friends before.
So what's the solution here? Where do we go from this point? Congrats on your friendship. Now go get an unappreciated retail job? Well, first, those high stakes have returned. It's time to just get out of here. But this isn't just your padded out chase sequence. It is the response this movie has to its established conundrum. Since Mike was born as the small, ignorable jawbreaker, he's barely noticeable by the pursuing humans. It's Sully that has to take all the brunt of that drama. Being a blue bear has its downsides, and the stakes are naturally heightened on someone born like that. Not to mention, he's just not as agile as the bipedal pinball dude. So when we come to one of those Pokemon cliff edges, you know the ones, Sully is essentially trapped, whilst Mike is unburdened. So without another thought, the solution is easy, for in this world, whether both like it or not, Sully is the main character, and Mike, well, perhaps his best position is in the supporting role, as the two do so without a second thought here. But it comes to more than that, as we'll see soon. The two escape back to that cabin in the woods, finally ready to return to the monster's world, only for...
No. Until the authorities arrive, this door stays off.
Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me!
The true solution hasn't been reached just yet, and only while cornered in a cabin in the woods can Mike truly reach his conclusion. See, through all of his depressing realization, there was one statement Mike made that was incorrect.
I could show everybody that Mike Wazowski is something special, and I'm just not.
Mike Wazowski might not have been born with the sharpest teeth, or the tallest stature, the greatest roar, or the angriest eyes, but what he didn't have at birth, he made up for every year since, and that was his theory. Being special doesn't come entirely from what you are given, but also from what you can deliver. And though Mike might not be suited to be a scarer, what Mike does have in droves is the ability to be a great manager. One of the best. There is still a place for him within the scare energy industry. Even if it's not exactly as he envisioned, he can still be a vitally intertwined part of it. And so this final act all comes down to one final task: to scare the humans, the real, adult humans, the toughest judges this world can offer, using a series of perfect theoretical techniques: scratches on the walls, slamming doors, paranormal illusions, paranoia triggers, and of course, the disarmament of their defenses. This final sequence is the embodiment of everything Mike can contribute to his craft and the culmination of the last decade of his work, all to be fit hand in hand with the natural talents of his new official friend to conclude us with one good scare that's been fully orchestrated by Mike alone. Oh! 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 Shit! The apotheosis of the whole concept of energy-based dimensional doors, achieved through a decade and a half of hard work by the guy without a scary bone in his body.
How did you do this?
This scene alone, I think, is what warranted the entire need for this sequel.
Don't ask me.
This, to me, was the greatest scene in the entire Monsters franchise. For its cinematography into a desaturated world of realism, the dialogue between two defeated characters, the pinnacle of what the Monsters universe can offer, and a message delivery that stands out against every other Pixar movie's messaging. Though, to be fair, I swear every Pixar movie greenlights their movies based on the conclusion of the third act, and just makes their way backwards from there. The goodbye scene in Toy Story 3, the memory scene in Coco, the piano scene in Soul, the piano scene in Soul, there we go. The piano scene in Soul, you get what I mean. And you ever notice how from this point on in the Monsters chronology, Mike goes from being the protagonist of this film to the supporting character of everything later? But he never lets it get him down. Even though he takes so many L's later in his adult life, Mike continues forwards with the brightest optimism of the bunch, eventually leading the world's energy industry through entirely different means, through both his birth-given stature as well as his hard work and determination. Was this really just one scene, or is it more like an extended sequence? Regardless, this has to be my favorite moment of the entire Monsters franchise. And though I recognize this movie has a bit of a mediocre and cliche plotline with a soundtrack that's a little too heavy on the brass for my tastes, to me, this moment is the Monsters world at its true peak. I'm gonna be honest, this is probably my favorite video of mine of all time. I put this one up third because you've probably seen it before. This video is one of my most watched of all time. This popped off. And I'm so glad that it was this one because it's really special to me. And I'm so glad that it's talking about this scene too because it's the best Pixar has ever made in my opinion. Is it Halloween-y? Somewhat. But is it one of the greatest of all time? Absolutely. This scene easily trumps its two predecessors in this compilation, and it's not even close. This might remain the best video I'll ever make, and for it to be this emotive and positive as well, yeah. I'm so happy about the results of this scene breakdown. Big shoes to fill going forwards, and maybe it'll be fulfilled. Next up is Aardman's Chicken Run. Endlessly British and undeniably horrifying. This movie legitimately traumatized me as a kid. A chicken is legit decapitated in this film. I never watched it all the way through in my childhood. I avoided it because it was just too damn scary. I don't know how well known Aardman movies are to the general population, so allow me to open up some of the rabbit hole that is British animation and Chicken Run. Releasing in June 2000, I was only a wee babber at 3 years old when this came out. Ripe for baby's first concentration camp. Cause look at this! Is this not essentially exactly that? Now, when coming to think of the scene that changed Chicken Run, I first thought to myself, boy, I gotta actually watch this movie. And then after that point, realizing I had no clue on like 60% of the scenes, I saw a few good options. There's the moment the chickens loosen up and dance the night away. The tense scene where you think a chicken's about to be plucked before the farmers change their whole business premise. The action sequence that takes place within the new pie making machine, or the entire sequence of the flying cabin escape plan. But no, these scenes are good, some of them even elevating the film's status. But you know what scene really changed Chicken Run? That really had an impact in a way no other scene in this movie did? It's the one that has the decapitation in it, damn it! So this spooky season, we're going back to the core of my childhood nightmares with the scene that somehow didn't turn me vegan. We begin 7 minutes into the movie. Jesus Christ, this scene starts 7 minutes in. We British are hardcore about our dark themes. Our protagonist Ginger has just been kicked into the grounds this morning, as has essentially become a routine since she keeps attempting to escape.
Perhaps I was in solitary confinement.
Jesus, this movie introduced me to solitary confinement at 3. Anyway, what really kicks off the scene is the bell to all line up. Or as the posh military rooster character Fowler would say, roll call! My goodness, this movie is so British. And so everyone scurries into place. Camera low down to their feet in the classic way to highlight their feet scattering in every which way before changing to aim up a little so you see more of the expressions. Everyone frantic and that one guy staring at the camera as we see Fowler commanding ever more.
Discipline! Order! I'm back in my RAF days when...
As we meet another main character, Bunty. Big, loud, and brutish. Happy to bump others for their own ways. This scene also acts as a way to meet some of our characters for the first time, hence the extra emphasis on it all. Anyway, she's opening up a space for our Ginger as they find their place.
Tally-ho! Tucks away!
Give over, you old fool. They just want to count us.
Yes, so British. Interestingly, they're intentionally hamming it all up. Aardman at this stage wanted to make it known that they were a British animation studio, so they've gone out of their way to bring in British idioms like give over, as well as ring out some accents that are less prevalent on screens in the day. Northern accents. What a shocker. Plus a Scottish one we'll see here in a bit. This movie was the first as part of a deal between Aardman and DreamWorks, hence why they wanted to push for the British representation, for the new American audience this could reach.
Why, back in my RAF days...
Fowler, they're coming back in line.
All right,
And now that horror seeps in under the surface. Mr. Authority this whole time is in fact just another one of the coop, and falls in line like everyone else. A light-hearted little gag with a real sense of terror on his face at the end, as our farming lady makes her evil appearance.
Ahead!
We only see her feet at first, happy to get a little dirty. And it kind of freaks me out how synchronous all the chickens are and how rigid they are when giving attention. Anyway, it's far from over from here. She steps in, still feet first, as we slowly reveal more and more of her stature. Gloomy colors facing away from the camera and a suspicious shape in her hand. But also, the camera does a wonderful little focus pull to focus out onto the chickens. There's actually a handful of really inventive and brain-bending shots in this movie that is a genuine marvel to see. Stop-motion animation is just mind-boggling when done well. And it certainly hits hard on the horror film. Chicken Run is a horror film, okay?
Welcome back, Ken. Is there a new plan?
And there's the Scotsman, asking for the next escape plan, coming in for a little bit of lightheartedness in between the severity of it all. I don't feel like it's enough for me, but hey, look how clueless the one on the right looks. And there she stands, looking like a pencil-neck version of Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. Absolutely horrifying in character design, and of course, shown at the most dominating angle, practically from the chicken's perspective. The only thing putting a smile on her face is the stretching of her glove. Very heavy-handedly symbolic of a chicken's... hair? Ruffle thing? Oh, comb. It's called a comb. Glove looks like a chicken's comb.
I thought we tried going under. Ah. Over, right.
Ah ha ha! Laugh away the fear, kids. Tease make the tears go away. And now we come right back to the stakes. We see a hint of what the farmer is looking out for, and now she's back on path to come to someone we know. She may be far away from the camera, but she's gonna start stepping closer agonizingly slowly. And we see the chickens look on in horror from between Mrs. Tweedy's big black boots, essentially chopping them like scissors with every step. As we learn that it's eggs they lay and eggs they're farming. The farmer poking through the egg production record only to stop at... The music as well coming in here as it builds up, only to drop back to these guitar picks as Mrs. Tweedy reads Edwina's poor report, showcasing her being looked down upon as she loses all power in the moment and is soon to be murdered and eaten. I'm just glad it's not me. Of course, 3-year-old me is still freaking out on the inside because I have to watch this thing. And Mrs. Tweedy is loving it. Look at her jolly smile. So as the other chickens murmur about how they could have helped, she's swiped away.
You didn't tell anyone.
The last shot you see of her face is one of her looking up in fear as the camera looms ever closer to her, her head shaking in terror. I also thought I caught a tear under her eye, but I think there's actually 2 frames where there's like a sparkle along the edge of her skin and beak. Wonder if that's an animation error or a very hidden tear. Either way, after this point, half the time Edwina is shown as nothing more than a dangling pair of legs, lifelessly swinging around before reaching their lifeless fate. And in the same shot that the farmers walk past, we come closer to the chickens for one final comment.
Oh, Is Edwina off on holiday?
Ha ha! Ha ha! Why haven't the chickens in the cinema stopped screaming yet? They just told a joke! But it doesn't end there, as this kids' movie wants to show the whole shebang. Here's the farmers carrying Edwina to the death house, and Mrs. Tweedy putting on those gloves in their classic ominous way, intending to do harm. Plus, she'd never touch a chicken with her bare hands like her husband does. Gross. And for us to see the next event, we need an explanation. And that comes in the form of Ginger going out of her way to witness it. They trade hands, and then we get to witness... a hanging pair of legs really brings the whole shot composition together there. This wasn't even the shot engraved into my mind, but bloody well could have been. This is horrifying. Those legs are horrifying. This whole movie was too much for a 3-year-old child. Mother! And so Ginger continues to follow however she can, now choosing to climb atop the roof of one of the huts to peer from above, giving her the rare spectacle no one else bothers to explore, or has the stomach to. Mrs. Tweedy grabs the axe and pulls it off frame as the camera lifts up to the shadow on the wall. They can't physically show a chicken being decapitated, but they can imply it in shocking detail. You see Edwina brutally pushed down to the pedestal, so intense her entire legs go up like that, as Tweedy's figure readies the blade, lifts up, and... my goodness, our angle didn't change from Ginger's new rooftop view, so that means she saw something else to us. She probably got to see the actual hidden aftermath of the whole thing. Christ! No wonder she was holding her neck in suspense. Everyone else was just minding their own business, yet unable to block out the sound of their peer dying in a moment. Why did I watch this so young? And so, depressed on their latest loss, Ginger turns around on her roof to sit down. And this shot here will also haunt my dreams. Just a simple shot of a claymation chicken with tears in its eyes as it's staring hauntingly into nothingness. There is so much raw emotion and despair in this shot. And then from above she hears... a symbol of freedom. Free birds flying in the open air, vastly above their little prison and out to the great unknown. A simple desire that is just not the reality for this collection of hens. As we see as the camera moves further down to show the industrial nature of the oppressive buildings around here. Rows and rows of the same hut, a couple of chickens playing chess, and... is that a watchtower over there? What kind of chicken farm needs a watchtower? This is 100% a camp allegory, and my feeble brain cannot handle it! This is intense for the first 10 minutes.
We've got to get out of here.
But it stands as the foundation to kick off the drive of all of our characters. And of course Ginger, who uses this as the stepping stone to push so hard to escape. It's all been premise building to showcase the stakes and show that the evil characters really are evil, even if 3 of them technically aren't too bad. And it's the very thing that jumps Ginger into action not moments later.
Spread the word, Mac. Meeting tonight in Hut 17.
And from there, it's a series of escaping hijinks, a spanner in the works, a montage of hope, a reveal of despair, a battle in between, and of course, the big bombastic finale. But whilst the film in general is a bloody good one, by far at least in my experience, this is the scene that changed Chicken Run. It made it clear just how intense the stakes were in this movie, and suddenly made you take it a lot more seriously. I just wish maybe I could have watched it a couple years later the first time, and not spend 22 more years avoiding it. Happy Halloween season, folks. What is it with stop motion being so well done for Halloween? I guess the whole art form is just creepy in that way. And with the original Chicken Run leaning into the grim and mucky, to have this scene that takes it that one layer closer down to hell, and yeah, this is such a definitively Halloween scene. It's so impactful, it scared children. It's the kind of scary I don't think studios are brave enough to do anymore. Better than Coraline? Actually, yeah, I'd say so. Sometimes it's even worse for what you don't see, rather than what you do. Speaking of things you'd rather not see, oh yeah, Lightyear was a thing. It kind of just came out and then stopped being talked about. For being as daring of a project as it seemed on the surface, it really seemed to pale in expectations for what should have felt like some sort of Toy Story spin-off reboot. But nevertheless, I couldn't make a scene breakdown back when it actually released, but I sure as hell can now. So what's the scene that makes Lightyear? Is it the first reveal of the time leap? Is it the introduction of Socks the cat? Is it that one fight scene I really wanted to gush about months ago? No, I think that would be disingenuous to the title that's already clickbaity enough. There is a scene in this movie that very clearly changes the whole of Lightyear and flips the entire dynamic on its head. It's really one of the few talking points that actually lingers after the film is over. It's of course the reveal of the identity of Zurg, and it starts like this.
No!
Like any good exposition dump scene, always gotta start with a good old scream. I won't go too into context as the dialogue will be covering most of that for us later, but all you do need to know is this device teleports one to Zurg's ship. So that's what's going on here. And with him abducted at the last minute, his crew can do nothing but look on.
Us?
That drum roll there is such a classic technique, but really upping the suspense as we're led into the other side of the circumstance. Good score. And thus begins our mini action sequence, first establishing the lands before we see Lightyear in Zurg's clutches, in a dark space to highlight Zurg's evil red eyes. There's even a little growl in there to seem all the more ominous. And of course, Lightyear squirms his way out and counterattacks. But of course, it doesn't last long, and our first hint that Zurg is aware of Lightyear in a way he can't comprehend, expecting the attack and having a deflect for it. And of course, the power dynamic is pretty classically stark compositionally. Zurg is always showed as monstrously tall and high to the camera, though Lightyear isn't so crushed in height, usually shot almost at height level since he's still empowered as the strong hero of our story, just a little disadvantaged. And so, with a brief couple shots to wordlessly show the plan to exit to our audience, Buzz Lightyear does a Toy Story 2. I mean, that is an identical move that was adapted for the video game in Andy's universe, just hopefully without the same ending. And though it's not death, Lightyear is still stopped in his tracks with a tripping. And Zurg blockades his path. Buzz isn't getting out of this arena, and so it's time for dialogue.
What is this? Where are we? Who are you?
And as Zurg refuses to respond, the power dynamic becomes more stark as it's dominating now. Zurg stepping forwards, towering over Buzz, leaving him shot incredibly low down as an over-the-shoulder shot across Zurg. The red underlighting only adding to the villainous vibe more. Until we do get a response with...
Now that's the question.
And now immediately that dominating posture is meeting the middle. It's no coincidence that Zurg loses some of his height here as he's starting the steps of meeting in the middle with Buzz. Not to mention that red color palette is being blasted out with whites and blues now. Not quite so ominous of a set piece.
You look good, Buzz.
Revealed slowly through several blinding shots to silhouette the old guy in obscurity, as not even Toy Story veterans really know who he is. What are the chances they're gonna keep up the Star Wars parody lore from Toy Story 2 anyway?
I am your father. No! Dad? Guess again.
Oh! I guess that's how they're gonna do it. Literally a cheeky wink to the audience as a reference to this moment from the original. Yeah, that's the only purpose of that slightly doofy line. Nonetheless, an old age Buzz. Probably the last thing any of us were really expected to see. It's certainly a twist, but lines up very nicely for this already established time travel movie. And so, suddenly, our big villain seems like a potential friend. And the composition reflects that, now showing the both of them on the same ground, even looking up to our Buzz now. Though one is still very lit up differently from the other, they're still different. And for those who don't get it yet, we have an exchange of dog tags. Each getting their own little lick in the score that suggests mystery and an elevating question as each one is revealed. How does that work? Asks the score, as their identities are confirmed to be the same. Not even showing faces in this shot, as that would be a distraction from the facts being addressed. And then we reconfirm it with...
Socks?
Hello, Buzz.
Still looking a tad evil with that eye, but it's more for age, and the voice is still equally friendly.
I don't understand.
Now, what actually follows is a completely separate scene, splitting the moment in half for the sake of pacing and storytelling, but I'm just gonna stitch these two moments together as they're practically the same scene. As we now come into what was actually quite a critique of the movie, a big ol' exposition dump. We're not gonna linger too crazy on the actual lines exchanged, but look into how the other filmmaking elements come together to help enunciate all the plot elements trying to be explained over this next minute.
You're not me, I'm me. You're you now, but I'm you 50 years from now.
The characters are keeping in motion here, clearly walking to their next point of interest, and it keeps the audience more interested than just standing static over this debate, traversing hallways like the ones from Toy Story 2. Again, this time maybe with less spikes.
If you're me, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 1273. Whoa.
And though all we're literally doing here is turning a corner into yet another identical hallway, minus the spikes, there's still some techniques going on here, as we stick to the same two shots, either walking towards or away from the camera, so that our Buzz always looks exposed whenever we see him speak, whilst old Buzz can continue to look away from the camera when he does, adding just that little bit of authority and power to him in composition alone. Nice. And a very classic bit here, obscuring this reveal so the audience can react to this information as quickly as Buzz does. A simple, family-friendly jump scare that you can even recognize isn't a threat from that missing calf it has. But here's some interesting information.
Robots can't quite say Buzz, so around here I'm just Zurg.
This is honestly a bit of a ham-fisted way to retcon the Zurg name, but hey, it's an attempt. Tactically missing out the Emperor part of his name there, I guess. But as old Buzz explains, our Buzz is out back eyeing up the thing before chasing up so he doesn't get left behind. Cute.
Don't worry about it. None of this is gonna matter.
And there's your cheeky, under-the-breath line of foreshadowing. None of this is gonna matter according to old Buzz, as his final plan will be to evaporate the entire timeline anyway.
Buzz!
Yes?
You have to explain it all to him.
And so, as we've had motion to keep us occupied and some eye candy to keep us going, only Socks here helps ground the situation by detouring us, and for the first time, old Buzz stops in his tracks and turns around. Perhaps quite thematic for his character in general to be so driven forward by his mission that he's stopped acknowledging the moments of the people around him. And even when he does, he's not that remorseful of getting ahead of himself. He thinks it's justified.
It's just exciting. You're finally here. See, I reached hyperspeed too.
And so it's flashback time, with shots we have seen before earlier in the movie with a new animated ending.
No, that new commander was going to arrest me for stealing the XL-15.
So what changed for the Buzz we experienced? Well, old Buzz arrived before he returned and had the base attacked so that they were trapped inside that bubble field that they were. Thus, the commander would never come out to arrest our Buzz in the first place. I saw some people getting hung up on how his time travel shenanigans made a difference, so there you are.
I found a way to get them home, and they didn't even care. So I escaped.
We had been seeing the home base getting more and more perturbed with Lightyear, although I like the idea that they were accidentally becoming Zurg, what with the robotic suits they started wearing. Still, it all lines up seeing these characters interact differently with what we already know of them.
Filled with technology you can't imagine, and that's when it dawned on me.
Well, you can see outright, this is Zurg's ship. He didn't build it, he just found it. Same hallways and all. The lighting here also bumped up on the bloom, as this super future seems more like a distant dream we can't properly perceive, before dissolving to white to make it all the more dreamy and abstract.
If we can use this crystal to go forward in time, why not use it to go back?
Something else the shots here do is add a very strong blurred vignette. You can't possibly understand this world, so you can't even see it in focus properly. Only the center of the frame, whatever Buzz is doing, can you recognize fully. And with one last beaming bloom, this time in rainbow colors for special effect, and stick in this same pose now for emotional effect as our Buzz comes to finally understand the situation.
This is a new now that's never been lived.
Wow, what a line. A new now that's never been lived. But now that we have the time travel logical sorted out, if you don't think too hard on it,
I'll explain later.
We can just continue the mission home, and none of this will have ever happened. It's a good plan.
And so we reach our meeting point. After all these dynamics of height, direction, distractions, and blooms, now we finally see the two in a simple two-shot, both looking towards each other and both on equal grounds. Two Buzzes perfectly in sync for the first time. And so they move on, discussing the crystal being the next steps.
This is as far back in time as I could get. Come on, help me configure the engine.
Now in this new TARDIS arena, old Buzz is more lax, spinning around as he exposites in front of the path, giddy yet personal as his goals are finally within reach.
Is this based on the turnip?
Set it for reverse thrusters full.
Maybe old Buzz is being mystique here, or maybe this is another red flag of a character trait as he doesn't acknowledge Buzz's question, just bulldozing forwards with what needs to be done next.
Oh no, this is all, borrowed.
As was hinted at during the flash forward, and it's the first step to undermining this aged character, as he doesn't necessarily come from a place of knowledge, he's scheming and clearly making it up as he goes along. More room to debate his position and perspective. And a cool wide shot so we can highlight the work of some great Pixar 3D environment artists doing their thing.
She'll get to be a space ranger again, Buzz.
Yeah.
And there it is, the embodiment of Buzz's original goal, laid out in front of him, because they're on the same page here. Sure, it's all about getting back home, finish the mission, sweeping away his mistakes, but more than anything else, Buzz is a selfless person, and his biggest demon is his guilt for robbing the life and career away from Alicia Hawthorne. With this timeline reversal, she'll get to be a space ranger again. But this is storytelling, and if you've ever heard of the Harmon story circle before, you'll know the formula to a good plot point always has the hero striving for a goal, seemingly reaching it, and coming to the conclusion that it's not what they want at all after the adventure they've been through. Because this drastic change in plan makes perfect sense if you haven't been down to the ground so long like old Buzz here. But for our Buzz,
she won't have Izzy.
Who's Izzy?
That's a big difference. There is a stark non-overlapping between the two experiences of our two Buzzes. One can easily blip away the existence of a generation, he's already done it across centuries of time, but our Buzz has actually met them, gotten to know them, and has built a relationship with them. The scaled up plan with thick, broad paint strokes suddenly seems like unthinkable destruction when looking at the smaller details. And it's the wedge that'll come between our relativity twins.
We finished our mission. Hand me your crystal.
Now, subtly, the lighting has changed. Old Buzz cascaded in shadows again, making his serious facial features ominous again as he's ready to do potentially the unthinkable. Not to mention moving to obscuring his face more behind the console. It puts the audience on edge and has us turning against him as our Buzz is internally doing.
I don't know, maybe we should think about this.
And as old Buzz's opposite, our Buzz holds the crystal, so naturally it's illuminating his face. They're starting to separate compositionally as they are no longer on the same page like before.
She had a whole life down there.
What kind of life?
And again, it all comes down to debate and experience. Our Buzz is running off of assumptions and his interactions with a young Hawthorne, whilst our Buzz has the full story, or at least is ready to hear that she was happy regardless.
We're supposed to matter. You don't want to live like this, Buzz.
And there's the crux of it, an unhealthy dose of existential crisis. You matter if you make progress as a space ranger, not as a humble civilian. Or in the case of old Buzz, never able to move on from your mistakes and living decades of guilt of what's happened. And striving endlessly, fruitlessly to try to clean up from your mistakes. This guilt has defined old Buzz, and he's running on the assumption that the same will happen to our Buzz too, because he's lived it already.
But you can finally let go of that, starting right now.
He's not really talking to Buzz anymore, he's talking to himself. Well, I mean, Buzz is himself, so I guess he always was talking to himself, but
I can.
But our Buzz is changed from his experiences and is ready to take on the more righteous path and move on from his mistakes as literally everyone else on this planet already has. He steps out of the spotlight and into the shadows as he makes his controversial plan. But as he walks away from the scene entirely,
you and me, we're not the same. I'm sorry.
He enters a new source of light, reaching a compositional path of enlightenment. And as for old Buzz, as for Zurg,
no Buzz, I'm sorry.
His light fixture has him glowing in backlight since he's still the subject of the scene, but everything else has strong shadows, and some underlighting on his face, the classic ominous and evil shot. And from there, his backup plan is taken into action. Lighting intimidatingly like big medical blinding lights, they turn the giant robots into darkened silhouettes. With Lightyear half their size and posed from a high angle, they completely obscure him on the frame, and we use the established format of the doors to crush out the frame into darkness. Buzz, in all the elements of this interaction, is entrapped by the dominating force of these henchmen. And that was the scene that changed Lightyear. It's not the most visually impressive or even dialoguely interesting, it's an exposition dump. And yet there are all sorts of hidden filmmaking elements all working in conjunction to bring together the plot points in its most interesting form for what they're working with. And of course, from the story perspective, this is the turning point as we get our sort of twist villain and an understanding from their perspective. Buzz leaving, or not really leaving the scene, a different man to how he entered, or at least a little more quietly. But hey, at least he didn't have to deal with any spikes. Lightyear was a nightmare in and of itself, but this villain scene, yeah, it was alright. This was the best scene you could muster from this movie, and it's a little spooky in that it's got that red underlighting. Oh, in a bubble, it's alright. Mid. In this ranking against some of the greatest Halloween-y movies of all time, maybe it's a little unfair to be included. Lightyear is right at the bottom. Nice to see the Toy Story 2 references though. Now how's about a Pixar movie that's actually more in line with spooky vibes, even if it's technically for November 1st? It's a villain reveal done maybe a little bit better. The scene that changed Pixar's Coco. It's the moment we learn of Ernesto de la Cruz's secret. This movie is very dear to my heart as it makes for a great first date movie, if you forget that it's all about dead people. And that's still hanging on now. All it takes is a simple, that's a fire hazard, to really cement a memory. And that's actually what I said in cinemas. But nevertheless, let's look at what this scene does to emphasize, impact, and change Pixar's Coco. Up to this point, our protagonist Miguel has been whisked into the land of the dead, hunting for his long-lost great-great-grandpa Ernesto de la Cruz, bumping into this guy Hector and having some hijinks along the way. But now he's been noticed.
I have a great-great-grandson!
And so Ernesto has been showing Miguel what death is like up at the top. And now it's time for a blessing to be given to Miguel so he can finally return home. Or else the kid'll vanish entirely.
Miguel, you must come to the show.
And De La Cruz is motivated to continue the showcase, an opportunity to share to the world the existence of his descendants he never knew he had. Unfortunately, this perfect scenario is one that Miguel can't follow through on for logistics' sake.
I have to get home before sunrise.
Oi.
Now, I certainly can't tell you precisely what animation techniques were used here to reveal Miguel's skeleton, but it's a fantastically new display of a character model I don't think we've ever seen in movies before. Pixar very often pushing the boundaries of what characters can look like with advancing technology, and now we have somewhat transparent skin. As the camera spins around from a low angle up to Ernesto observing and high on Miguel as he covers up his spine. And sticking to him as we're more affiliated with him, unsure of Ernesto's next move as he dashes off screen. In reality, Ernesto is setting up to achieve Miguel's desires and beginning the steps to allow his exit from the land of the dead.
It has been an honor.
The camera curiously keeping far back from Ernesto, as if we are Miguel, watching in place as he goes to these flowers. It could simply be to keep up the mystery, as Miguel, and so we, don't really know what to expect or how to act. But it also plants the seeds of a bit of distrust in Ernesto, as something feels off about the shot. Why are we seeing the back of him? Why didn't he say where he was going? Why is he plucking just some random petal off of a stairway post? Couldn't it be from a more glorious piece of decor somewhere? Plus, the guy's not really in the light either. It all just perturbs the audience, at least subliminally, the first time through.
I hope you die very soon.
Just adding a little more unease considering how off the subtext feels, but it is just a joke, a quip from the writer's room given all the context. Though interestingly again, when we see Miguel, it's an over-the-shoulder shot, up close and personal to see Miguel's expressions, but Ernesto? Distant again, in more of a two-shot, not another over-the-shoulder shot. And maybe it's because, as a character, he too has much less of a personal connection to Miguel. They've only just met. It's a little awkward, and he's never really shown himself to be a family man before.
I give you my blessing.
We had a deal, Chamaco.
Chamaco means kid, by the way. But the conflict has now arrived. Remember Hector from the summary? He's kind of been left in the dust recently, but now he's caught up to Miguel, wanting one thing after all he's done for the kid in this afterworld.
You said you'd take back my photo. You promised, Miguel.
And keeping it interesting with a quick change that would make theater kids jealous.
He told me he knew you.
Hector?
And now we get that over-the-shoulder shot as Miguel seeks Ernesto for safety against an agitated Hector. And I love the squinting realization Ernesto has recognizing Hector. It's an old friendship with Miguel out of the picture, so he's barely in the frame now that we're touching this topic. But as Hector ignores Ernesto to beg to the child, camera lingering low, Ernesto commandeers the scene, bringing us up to him again as he observes the photo himself, before Hector lashes out with old drama.
Whose fault is that?
Hector, please.
Those were my songs you took.
Keeping it secret this entire movie, Hector drops this truth bomb on us all, angrily pushing forward against the frame, yet still smaller and powerless compared to Ernesto's natural height and success. And he's got a perfect defense.
I only sang your songs because I wanted to keep a part of you alive.
The alibi he likely had planned after all these years. Miguel now so irrelevant, he's not in the frame at all. But right now, this isn't Hector's main concern, and is happy to avoid it and not pick a fight.
Miguel can put my photo up, Hector, and I can cross over the bridge.
This point doesn't linger very long, but Ernesto is already being dismissive here. He doesn't want to give Hector access, perhaps already trying to close off any inkling of his secret coming out. He avoids eye contact, he moves out of frame behind Hector, and at this wide shot, as Hector's voice cracks, he just steps away looking at the photo. We don't stick on this reaction very long, as the conversation quickly tails away to the real conflict.
Remember the night I left?
That was a long time ago.
It's the source of Ernesto's true crime, so he immediately wants to dart away, unsuccessfully.
And you told me you would move heaven and earth for your amigo.
Like in the movie?
As much as Miguel has been an afterthought in this drama and barely present in the composition, it's time to turn this around as he is the spanner in the works of all this, stepping forward and closer to the camera as he speaks up with his revelation to add more to the plot. He's seen this very scenario already in one of Ernesto de la Cruz's movies. I'd say it's a very naive choice to make a movie based off of a real murder you did, but he produced this while he was alive, so he probably thought this would never turn around on him from Hector somehow seeing it.
I would move heaven and earth for you, mi amigo.
Maybe it's a bit naive to have this movie still playing in your mansion, and especially timing it to be on right now, but hey, that's just storytelling. And Hector is left just standing stunned as we look down on him. Miguel walking into the frame to add some more information.
But in the movie, Don Hidalgo poisons the drink.
Meanwhile, this whole time, Ernesto, like a theater performer it seems, is left just standing in place looking at the photo, freezing up as it spirals out of his control, or just for dramatic effect. And so, in reaction to all this news, jolting at the reveal of poison in the movie too, Hector steps forward as the camera follows his focus, blurring away Miguel as we come back to the conflict of the adults in the room.
Ernesto, the night I left.
Beautiful, a match cut, a movement mimicked between shots and between scenes, now engulfed in sepia like any good flashback should be. We see a young, living Hector moving silently as dead Hector narrates.
I got homesick, and I packed up my songs.
Ooh, and the closing of the book is in sync with the delivery of songs, a punchy end-off for Hector quitting his career.
You wanna give up now, when we're this close to reaching our dream?
And now with enough transition, the sepia scene itself can talk. Also, I love the blurred vignette around the edges of the frames, bringing more of that feel for a distant, kind of dreamy effect of a distant memory.
I can't do this without your songs, Hector.
And this is the most dynamic shot of the flashback. So much more energy and desperation in it compared to any shots of that self-confident Hector. And very emblematic of what Ernesto will do later. And so, we know how the plot is to go. Let's see it.
I'm sending you off with a toast.
The soundtrack now changes to a gentle, romantic guitar as a reflection of Ernesto's innocent gesture at face value. The next shot's now mimicking the shot list of the movie to a T, apart from the realization of the poison this time. And so, down the street a little later, we see it.
But I felt a pain in my stomach.
Perhaps it was that chorizo, my friend.
Interesting that we don't see Ernesto's face for the first few seconds of this. Perhaps he needs a moment to get into character to perform his sympathetic face, as I imagine he isn't shocked. Perhaps even delighted at first response. And we switch up from a close-up low angle to highlight the intensity of the poison to a wide-out high angle. We don't really want to be close up for the moment of death. This isn't Monster House.
Or something I drank. I woke up dead.
And the end of the piece of sheet music is a final guitar note synced with a bell, the motif of death. It was Ernesto's big betrayal wrapped up in a single guitar sequence, from the start of a toast to the end of a life. And from the darkness we get a harsh cut back for extra dramatics. Plus it's probably the mimicry of going from life to darkness to afterlife too. Just very good storytelling all around.
All this time, I thought it was just bad luck.
And now the conflict has switched to Hector's personal revelations. Now Miguel and Ernesto are blurred as Hector searches within himself in the foreground. And in the past, more than just the border is blurred, the focus is miscentered onto the book as Ernesto grabs it, as if literally nothing else in this scene matters, as it doesn't to De La Cruz.
I never thought that you might have. That you...
The shots aren't doing anything particular here, but it's our first glimmer foreshadowing the real version of Remember Me. Eagle-eyed viewers will spot the note, rubato, simply, tenderly on the page, certainly not the version Ernesto ends up playing, disregarding the entire tone and purpose of the song's origin. And then we're back again as Hector fails to finish his sentence. The flashback was in real time to Hector remembering.
How could you?
A natural response, and the shot of Miguel stepping back wasn't needed. It could have just turned from the same angle of Hector looking away, but no, we need to see how Hector is disregarding Miguel in the moment, as it's not his fight. Also, did you notice that punch?
Could you?
Getting a whole swing sound effect before being stopped. The fight has some hits in it, but it's not the focus of the action. Instead, it's mostly displayed out of focus or off screen as more of a scuffle.
Security! Security!
So it's kind of satisfying to hear the pops of the bones hitting together. Anyway, Miguel again is shown completely useless in the sequence of events as security come running in to overpower Hector.
You took everything away from me! You rat!
As the camera follows Hector up but stays put as he is pulled away. Any further shots now stabilizing as De La Cruz has regained control. When he stands next to Miguel, he's calm, and when Hector is dragged away, his stance is cemented, and there's nothing Hector can do.
I just wanted to go back home! No!
In fact, the camera's even pulling away, distancing Hector away from his goals even further. And now we're back where we started. It's just Ernesto and Miguel. But this interruption has changed the entire dynamic of the scene. We see from the other perspective now Miguel and Ernesto so far away. And when closing up, Miguel is now stood in Hector's revelatory stance. He knows Ernesto's secret now, and De La Cruz becomes more of an ominous figure over his shoulder.
You were going to give me your blessing.
Yes,
Both of them are awkward, avoiding eye contact, and they both probably picked up the subtext at the moment, especially considering the original request.
I would hate to have you think
That you murdered Hector?
And now with each shot we get progressively closer to the two of them as the intensity intensifies. And Ernesto is lit up with green. Never trust green in a Disney movie.
You don't think that, do you?
No.
And the power dynamics are stark. De La Cruz looking more tall as we peer up from Miguel's height, and the stare of his eyes don't really look concerned, more intimidating. And then we get that turn. With all that has been learned, De La Cruz can no longer give Miguel his wish in case it was to get out.
Security!
And with a flick of his eye, Ernesto doesn't even look at Miguel anymore. He's as irrelevant as he's always been again. Anything for success.
Take care of Miguel. He'll be extending his stay.
What? He's a call for action now, much more confident than before, and he doesn't even stick to the frame anymore as he's ready to move on to better things. And as a final word, De La Cruz turns on the stairs for one final lesson.
You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to seize your moment.
Flipping on its head the optimistic message he spread as a celebrity that we've heard all throughout this movie into one of malice and selfishness. And all told with more green glow and a slow zoom in as we see Ernesto for who he truly is. And so he turns away for the final time, Miguel taken care of.
I know you understand.
No!
The doors framing our final shot that closes us into darkness as De La Cruz becomes untouchable and ever distant once again. The true villain of the story. Never meet your heroes, kids. Or your supposed great-great-grandpa anyway. And from there, the true message of Coco can continue onwards. After spending all this runtime chasing up to meet this guy, for it to finally fall apart here with a sudden realization for Hector and a betrayal that seemingly dooms Miguel, the movie is set up to turn the tables on us and snap back with one of the most satisfying endings to a Pixar movie to date. As from here, it's time for Prison in a Pit, with another more significant twist on Hector's front and an opportunity for the good ending that'll not leave a dry eye in the room. But this, to me, was the scene that changed Pixar's Coco. The Incredibles may be my personal favorite Pixar movie subjectively, but I think Coco is one of Pixar's contenders to #1 objectively. Or maybe that's just my personal biases for founding a 5-year relationship. Just don't decorate your rooms like this, kids. It is a serious fire hazard. With Pixar's Coco, it's a villain reveal done maybe a little bit better. It has more nuance for how the villain is twisted into existence, and it has a more impactful core for the larger story. Coco is my favorite Pixar movie of all time, so I'm always going to be a little bit biased for it, but being Halloween-y only because it's villainous and all about the afterlife, I'd say it's grand, but doesn't overthrow the real spooky scenes. Coco comfortably takes its place behind Coraline and above Hotel Transylvania 1. And so for our final number, we have one last Pixar one. I couldn't really mix the studios much more than I already have for this comp. It's back to the monsters with their original spooky scene. But yes, Monsters, Inc. is one of those perfect Pixar movies I can just never praise enough. Every single scene in this production feels meticulously crafted with a story that only seems to hit closer to home when you realize it's about an energy crisis and not just dimension-hopping monsters. But though I could easily talk your ear off about every moment in this movie, we're gonna focus today on the scene that has the most threads looping back to it. The start of the end for our Monsters, Inc. storyline, and the floodgates of that second act depression every good tale follows. It's the point where Boo finally learns that her kitty is just an awful a monster as the rest of them. And also our big bad villain is established. You're not fooling me! The sequence begins with Sully and Mike running through the halls, just trying to escape Monsters, Inc. after unveiling the conspiracy plot underlying the whole thing. See, among this energy crisis, Randall here is part of a plot that intends to kidnap human children from their world, bring them into the basement of the factory, and manually extract them for screams since, as we've heard,
kids these days, they just don't get scared like they used to.
There really is a thing of old Pixar movies really diving into absolute horror undertones. Genocide of a society of supers, and now literally child kidnapping and torture. I was 5. This scene of the aftermath on poor Fungus here, yes, his name is Fungus by the way, traumatized me a good bit in the big screen. Anyway, having noticed that by being the decoy for the child that they've been trying to return to their room, they're now on the run from Randall, until they're given a hint of what their next best move is.
Goodbye, Monsters, Inc. Goodbye, Mr. Waternoose.
What is a simple comic line from Mike is a genuine train of thought for Sully, as he recognizes Mr. Waternoose, CEO of Monsters, Inc. entirely, could be there to solve their issues and address this Randall conspiracy. And so, it's our leading line into our next scene, after a small disagreement.
Follow me, I have an idea.
No.
Bringing us right back round to the simulation room. This calls back to the very first scene of the runtime, and it's this guy again training to scare a child unsuccessfully. It's where Waternoose is on location right now, and he's mimicking Mike's early no-no-nos with his own.
No. You're trying to scare the kid, not lull it to sleep.
Waternoose stepping closer to the camera as he gets slightly more heated over this guy. Dude's not a scarer, more like an entertainer. This just isn't the industry for him. Yet. But this beat as a whole...
I was going for a snake/ninja approach with a little hissing.
Is a comedic sidestep to the otherwise pretty serious plot for the moment. Laugh at the doofier sides of this monster reality. It's a good way to have kids genuinely not so afraid of imaginary monsters in their closets. And it only continues more with...
It's all about presence, about how you enter the room. Mr. Waternoose!
Classic. Forget show, don't tell. Tell, and then immediately show as well. And you know, it seems to be quite a recurring character trait for Sully, as much like in the sequel, he enters in quite the similar uproarious way.
And the...
I tried to run from it, but it picked me up with its mind powers and shook me like a doll.
Well, a kid flew right over me and blasted a car with its laser vision. It's true! I saw the whole thing! Did we see the same thing? To me, all these testimonies smell like a bunch of bullshit.
But anyway, they're here, and Waternoose is their last hope. If it wasn't for the fact that he's a little distracted.
No, sir, you don't understand. Now, show these monsters how it's done.
I can't. Camera remaining static and wide for the majority of the scene, apart from when Boo is involved, as Boo's location throughout this scene is very important to keep track of. Plus, it's kind of emblematic of how small Boo's world is. She's not aware of the economic infrastructural dilemmas of this monster society, she just knows she's in Mike's hands right now, as Sully is warded away from her. her.
Pay attention, everyone. You're about to see the best in the business.
This is just more of the same gimmick, but I only noticed on this rewatch, Phlegm scooting off the stage in the background. I love it. And so the scene is set, literally. We're fully on this detour now, taking us back to that same lighting from the start of the movie. And as the simulation is booted to reset...
Night, sweetheart. Night, Mom.
Which is literally the first lines of the entire movie, by the way.
Good night, sweetheart. Night, Mom.
Boo immediately makes a dash out onto the scene now that they can see. You can imagine where this is going, and very on theme for Boo, since running out to where she's not supposed to be is like 90% of her personality, and the last 10% is sleeping.
Give us a big, loud roar. Mr. Waternoose, there's no time for this!
And though subtle, there is that authoritative compositing with Waternoose's head high up in the frame and close to the camera, whilst the wide on Sully is wide. Easy for us to spot Boo.
What are you waiting for? Roar! But sir!
And as the obvious climax builds up, the camera shots get closer. Closer on Waternoose, closer on Sully, and who knows where Boo is now, until...
Roar!
It is fully zoomed on Waternoose. There's that moment of hesitation from Sully with that weird rumble of his. And then that roar covers all of the frame. This whole time, Sully has been portrayed as a big, cuddly blue bear, caring for a sweet and tiny child, but the reality is, he is a monster. He has a career on being scary, and though we've never seen him actually do it with our own eyes, he's clearly the best in the business. It's an obvious point, but one Boo certainly has been unaware of this entire time, if not obvious from her reaction. It's the shattering moment that starts this entire depression arc, destroying the trust that Boo had for Sully unconditionally and splitting the team apart. Plus, you can tell that Boo thought Sully was aiming it at her, making it all the more traumatizing for her.
Well done, James.
Honestly, Boo's size difference could have led to a lot worse.
Where did she go? Did she turn invisible? Did she disappear? I just have no idea.
And so, with Waternoose's directive followed through, he's a happy chap and ready to usher everyone out of the room. But while he's often heard only in the background organizing the troops, we will be seeing Sully following up on Boo as she hides away in fear of her only friend here. Trying to hide as far away in a tight, dark corner since she sees Sully differently now. How she's supposed to see a big bear monster.
Boo.
And though it is heartbreaking for Sully, he doesn't know what to say or what to do. He's going through a bit of an identity crisis, finally asking himself what it is he wants, or more so, what it is he doesn't. He doesn't want to be the villain of this story, he just wants to protect this child. And on the Waternoose front, he's done with his public business and clearly not entirely unaware, choosing to stay in the room after everyone's gone, carefully dictating who's in and who's out. And good choice, because...
the child!
The jig is up entirely, though to be fair, perhaps Mike and Sully were intending to tell Waternoose this as well, as part of the plan. But there's certainly no going back from here. And so as Mike jumps in to attempt to explain the whole situation...
Sir, she isn't toxic. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me.
The conversation takes a backseat in the background, as the point of this moment now is between Sully and Boo. Still unsure on what exactly it is Sully should say or do to resolve the situation, but...
That wasn't real. It's just I was just...
Well, at least he's trying. But though so far he's only been left dejected and stunned at this miscommunication, this room is set up with the perfect self-reflection station to really ham in Sully's realization. And Sully's face drops as he finally gets to see himself in the moment, not relishing in a great victory that comes with praise and confetti and a giant number statistic, but lingering back to the room where it happens, where a childhood is traumatized for the sake of personal and societal gain. Sully as a character is not a monster, but Sully in reality is. And he's one of the worst of them all. This moment here will be the turning point in Sully's understanding of himself and his place within this world.
Now that we have her, he is trying to kill us!
And though the dialogue as Mike continues to exposite to Waternoose is now at least audible again, we're not meant to be paying express attention, as the real storytelling is coming from the visuals. And the very fact that Boo is now taking refuge behind the crab legs of Mr. Waternoose now, a monster she literally met a few seconds ago over her giant kitty of the past couple days.
And we can take you to a secret lab, which is right here in this factory.
It is so simple cinematographically. It's just an exchange of looks in the middle of it all, but it is so simple in portraying the core betrayal felt at the center of this scene.
Oh, how could this happen?
But Waternoose is finally fully informed, distraught over the directions these turn of events have gone, seemingly positioned on their side, but of course you can read into this dialogue all the more, and it only becomes more clear on Waternoose's unique perspective as he asks,
Does anyone else know about this?
Seeming now to want to tackle the trail that's coming off of these events. It could be a sign of underlining villainy, or as he tries to justify it to their faces,
This company can't afford any more bad publicity.
tactically cutting to a shot of Sully over this point, as he would be seen as the bad publicity, carrying this child all around Monstropolis, as well as that he is seen as bad publicity right now in the eyes of Boo. I also think it works quite well to keep the smarter dialogue that the adults are more likely to process hidden under a visual cue that's more akin for children in the audience to digest without being bored. And so, what is Waternoose's idea for tackling this issue brought to him? Well, he's a professional, an authority figure to look up to, and he says,
Before we do anything else, let's take care of the child.
Precisely what we all want to hear. Until you realize take care of can be a synonym for the opposite. But alas, even in the best case scenario, this means a bittersweet goodbye for Sully and Boo, ending on awful terms despite everything they've been through. And clearly, that idea weighs on Sully. But it is seemingly the right thing to do.
I'm sorry you boys got mixed up in this, especially you, James.
A genuine sounding piece of an apology. Saddened that his top scarer has to be handed this drama, but with an alternate undertone in there too. Saying goodbye to Sully, a large sacrifice now as he's the top scarer.
Now we can set everything straight again for the good of the company.
And with his final line, it is yet another double entendre, being good for the company's public image to hide this small discrepancy, and also committing a crime for the sakes of the benefits the company will reap from it. And throughout, we just have Sully's face. It's these huge expressions that really sell this scene, and all the others in the movie too, showing how it's much more than just the fur technology that made this character design so groundbreaking. Without these kind of expressions, could you imagine how some other scenes would have played out? But in case the fact that every line from Waternoose was clearly steeped in ulterior motives, this static shot of the door arrival helps to clue in the other people in the audience. The intention was never to send Boo back to her room, prim and perfect. It's yet another sequence of shoving her away without a care in this world.
Sir, that's not her door.
A mirroring of the same conversation Mike had with Sully earlier, except back then he was gunning for the other team. But by now, he too cares about the safety of Boo.
I know. It's yours.
And there it is. Maybe that door closing shot was more intentional than we first thought. Not only does Waternoose know of the conspiracy hidden in the basement, but he is in cahoots with it too. Randall even ready to help with this final action, as the solution is to remove the whistleblowers and tackle the energy crisis head on. And thus ends our sequence of unveiling the true conspiracy beneath Monsters Incorporated. This seed of corruption and desperation against a changed world bleeds right the way up to the top. Emblematic of a company that refuses to adapt against new circumstances, it will push on to more immoral extremes just to make a profit. And these boys were just caught in the middle of it, a point that Waternoose genuinely is perturbed about. If only he could keep his best scarer too. But though this scene calls back to the first scene, pinpoints on Sully's identity crisis, throws Boo through a loop, and reveals Waternoose as the big bad behind it all, it also acts as the shining example of Mike and Sully's deteriorating connection. At the start, they are glued to each other, continuity error and all, but once the kid comes in, Sully prioritizes her, forging out his own path and disregarding Mike more and more. Even the start of this scene has Sully turning away from Mike's plan, much to his dismay.
No, 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 no.
And at every step, Sully has been the one in charge, blasting through with his overbearing presence, and every step has led them here, banished in the great outdoors. And so, to finalize our scene and move the plot forwards, Mike finally snaps.
You're still not listening!
And from there begins the big sad of banishment. The severing of Mike and Sully's connection as best friends, and abandonment too. But none of it could be achieved to reach these emotional heights if it wasn't for calling back to this simulation scene and bringing everything to a head here. The camera techniques weren't too grand. Everything's pretty static and standard for the most part, but nonetheless, this is where it all turns downhill, and you can't have a good resolution without the depressing slump first. So to me, this was the scene that changed Monsters, Inc. Now, if only comedy could be used as a fuel source instead, none of this would have been a problem then.
I tell you, it's great to be here in your room. Where you from?
Your mum. Go on then, you monocle, tell us a joke.
Oh, I love kindergarten. Best 3 years of my life. Of my life.
No. Tell us a funny joke.
Dodgeball was the best. Oh, yeah. I was the fastest one out there. Of course, I was the ball. But I was the ball. See? All right.
You know, it's weird to see myself out of context chucking in sketches to a scene breakdown. I wasn't expecting that on this rewatch. It was an attempt. As for the scene itself, honestly, while grand and actually really good when you pay proper attention to it, I always found that it kind of slipped by quite quickly when watching the whole movie. The real scary number is the Scream Extractor scene, but I didn't end up picking that one for the scene breakdown back in the day for some reason. So Monsters is on a bit of a disadvantage as much as the prequel is the best of the bunch. So let's put Monsters, Inc. down to a considerable second to last, only beating Lightyear for having genuine emotive beats that just work better. And that roar probably scared some kids somewhere. And that is, altogether, our collection of Halloween-y scenes. I stopped doing the scene series a good long time ago now, as I kind of feel like I exhausted it. I think I covered pretty much every technique I could for the different scenes and trying to vary them. I could revive it one day if I feel there's demand for it and if there's something new to say, but as a final lap on the series, I think it's nice to compartmentalize them all into packages like this, revisiting some of the heights of animation when the season allows. So thank you for joining me on this retrospective. On that note, I'll finally put this 2-ish hour video to rest. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Tell me your thoughts on these scenes or what other movie moments would totally fit the Halloween-y bill, and I shall see you in a little bit.